through the eyes of the megaminds of our time. The diagnosis, a pro analysis. Every Saturday from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. on Relax Radio.
Hello and welcome to the Diagnosis, a pro analysis where we talk about, everything and anything that's happening in Sri Lanka. The economical crisis, the financial crisis, the political crisis, and every problem in general. So today, as always, I know that you guys are very excited to meet who we have. So today we have a very, very special guest with us, and that is a Mrs. Naushalya. Hello and welcome, Naushalya.
Hi, Mika. I hope you can hear me. And
I
of
can hear
course,
you crystal clear. Very well. How are you? How have you been?
I've been well actually amidst the youth uprising that is going on in the country. I've been fortunate enough to be still well amidst all the power cuts, amidst all the fuel crisis, still alive and living.
Now, I mean, yeah, the fuel crisis and everything, we all experience it, right? So, but before we move on to everything, I just, want you to introduce yourself to the audience. I mean, there are people who know you actually, but let's simply give them an idea. Let them know who you are. Who is Naushalya Rajapaksha?
Well, I'm a very simple individual. I'm also an attorney at law by profession. I'm specializing in criminal law, and at the same time, I'm also a researcher and a consultant. And I founded the Helia Foundation in 2018 and have been working there with all my fellow colleagues ever since.
Yearly Foundation. Now, coming back to a Yearly Foundation, what is a Yearly Foundation all about? I think that people would love to listen to you about, you and Yearly Foundation. How did all this happen?
Well, actually, it happened somewhere in 2018 where I
Hmm.
thought to myself, it's about time that I created something, a safe platform for individuals like me to come on board and to sort of think of ways in which we could really bridge the gap between law and women and younger and youngers, because see, always law always seems to us, I mean unless and otherwise you've really studied law in your life, the subject of law always seems like something which is very unattainable, something which is very
Yes.
complicated. So but I wanted to create a platform that would really bridge that gap, where so much so in 2018 that's how Yehelia was born. And so Yehelia is actually a registered foundation, and since its inception, we've been working to create a safe space and an equal platform for young girls and women by spreading awareness about the existing laws that really protect their rights and the sort of issues that the law itself entail and how best we could counter it. So I would say, in short, Yehelia is something that bridges the gap between law and women and young girls in the country.
Now, yes, as you said, now, Shalia, we do feel that law is unattainable in a way. Now, since we actually talked about it, I would like to, dive into it. So, do you think that it is really necessary that people know about law and what's happening in Sri Lanka, in general, and do people do they should they have a rough idea about law in general? Is it a necessity?
Mega, absolutely 1000%. I think any individual should have a basic understanding as to what the law is, and that is a huge gap even in our education system. Because even in our primary and even in our secondary education, law is not a mandatory subject that individuals need to undertake, and I think that is really unfortunate. So, for an example, a person who have not studied law would only be any, I mean, they would display any sense of interest towards learning about what the law is and about the process and about the legal institutions only when they come up with a only when they encounter a certain legal issue. and unless and otherwise they encounter legal issue, they have no idea as to what the law is and how it works. So I think from our primary education itself, law must be a mandatory subject in which we learn about jurisdictions, we learn about, what the role of the police stations, at least, the simple things that, are always, kept away from us unless and otherwise you really study the subject.
Exactly. I do agree with you now, Shala. Now, since we, talked about a law, and since we also talked about Yehelia Foundation and how it actually, helps women in general to represent themselves in, political bodies and in the society in general. How does this work? How actually Yehelia Foundation helps the women to, represent themselves in the society?
Mika, I must share this at the very inception that, of course, at Yehelia, all of us are working voluntarily. We don't
Oh,
have any hidden donors, or we don't have, like, an international or national donor who funds us. So everything that Yehelia has done thus far, we've basically, spent it out of our own pockets. So with what we earn by working, we basically sort of utilize it for the work of Yehelia. But even then, last year we were able to launch the Diyavanna Tarane outcome document. The Diyavanna Tarane means crossing Diyavanna, because you know that Parliament is situated right in between right in midst of the Diyavanna lake. And so we wanted to call that report Crossing Diyavanna to highlight the sort of barriers that specifically women will encounter if any one of them want to actually get into the parliament. So with that in mind, we conducted like a year-long research by talking to individuals, community leaders, political representatives, youth leaders, civil society organization representatives, NGOs, and INGO representatives. And after talking to them, we were able to consolidate this one report that not only highlighted the issues but also the recommendations to how best to counter the issues that were highlighted. So even thanks to this report, we even got an opportunity to present. The two of the directors of the Helia Foundation actually went and did a fantastic presentation to the Parliamentary Reforms Committee at the Parliament itself, where they took the outcomes of this report and they presented the outcomes of this report to this particular committee, in which they highlighted the sort of issues that women face specifically when entering the political architecture of the country.
that is actually, I think you are doing a wonderful job. I know that you have a very, very good team, but you in general, you are doing a wonderful job to the women in general. Now, since we talked about women and women representation, now what kind of barriers do women have? And, especially when it comes to politics, parliament, and women, what kind of barriers do they have in general?
Well, Mika, I would say, first of all, this issue with relation to the fact that in Sri Lanka we still don't have a cap on election finances or election spending. So, because of that, unfortunately, we don't have an equal level playing field. Meaning, now in other countries, of course, we have seen the election campaign finance acts being there, but in Sri Lanka, we don't have such a thing, which would regulate the sort of campaign spending or election spending in the country. Because Mika, what we need to understand is Sri Lanka, predominantly people would favor welfare politics over somebody who would be educated, but of course who wouldn't have much money to spend on a huge election campaign, so to say. So
Exactly.
and so therefore what happens is, now let's take you and I. We as women who do, I mean, we do our work, then we earn our money. It is very transparent as to how we earn our money. If anybody wants to peruse our financial records, and then that money is almost enough for us to get about with our day-to-day activities and our day-to-day expenditure. But if you and I are invited to do politics, of course, the biggest issue we'll face is, okay, how am I going to finance my campaign? How am I going to then get the voters to like me? Because voters are used to this concept, this notion of welfare politics, where for the longest time they were given something. When I say given, they weren't just given ideas or creativity or solutions. They were not just given that, they were given something palpable, something for them to hold, like a
Yes.
box of groceries, or like, as they say, or half a bottle of alcohol, so to say, to get them on to their for their
That's the general thing.
exactly. But then all of them are costly affairs. So the biggest question that someone like you and I would face, being so educated, coming from this background, from this educational background, is, okay, who is going to finance my particular campaign? That's the biggest barrier that even in Sri Lanka most of the women face. It's not that we don't have women, it's not that we don't have educated women, it's not that we don't have women who are very capable of taking leadership. Because even if you look at some of the existing political parties, you will see that in the ground level most of their community leaders are women. They are the ones who organize these meetings, they are the ones who organize these rallies, and so to say. But when it comes to campaigning, like when it comes to receiving nominations, they themselves sometimes don't receive nominations, not because they lack any leadership qualities or skills, but because of this existing issue of finances. So I think this has continuously been the biggest issue, because we see that some of the candidates don't even disclose how they have got the donations, and who have actually given these donations, for an example, because that is very important. Because in a campaign, to know who funds you and why they are funding you, it's very important. So, because most of the candidates don't even declare their assets in this country, and sometimes it's only, I mean, even though there are provisions in the General Elections Act, in the Provincial Councils Elections Act, even in the Local Authorities Elections Act, for you to sort of declare your assets. But then most of the candidates are not really, they are not really interested. And sometimes there is no mandatory obligation on them to declare their assets at the very outset. So, because of this issue of finances in toto, I feel that this acts as one of the biggest barriers for women to enter politics in Sri Lanka and sustain in politics also.
Exactly. I really have to agree with you on that now, Shalya. Now, since we talked about the barriers that we have, and since you're a very good lawyer, I would like to know what kind of barriers that you had when you came into your particular field. Now, I know that we have lots and lots of youth. We have a youth audience, and many of them, they want to become a lawyer. Someone out there might, want to become someone like you. So, what kind of barriers did you face when becoming a lawyer?
Well, Mika, once again, unfortunately, what we need to realize is, if you look at the Sri Lanka's education system, it's divided into subjects, but there is no guidance, like an express and unambiguous sort of a guidance provided for the candidates or for the students to understand, okay, after I take this subject, where can I go, and what are my other options. You don't know that until you do it, and it's basically like for you to figure out, right? Because we don't have this guidance, and like a fixed mentorship path. So I after I did law, I did my London A level examinations in law. And after I did law, I knew that I had to do my LLB, or like my Bachelor of Laws. And after that, I knew I had to get myself enrolled at Sri Lanka Law College, which I did. And then I got through my law college exams. But it was after I got through A levels, Bachelor of Laws, and Law College. And it was only after I became an apprentice, I knew what being a lawyer was like. So it basically took me 8 years of studying to know what I was actually going to do. Because in all those 8 years I was merely studying the subject, but I had no practical knowledge as to what I was getting myself into. So after I became a lawyer, only I actually realized the inherent biases that people had within them, especially when a woman was doing law. I think I should disclose this particular story also, where I remember when I was apprenticing, a colleague of mine she was adamant to get married before she took oaths as a lawyer. So I was pretty surprised. I was like, wait till you are done with all these exams and you can get married as a lawyer. That is a huge thing if you really want to get married.
Exactly.
And then she said, when you become a lawyer in this country, you don't get marriage proposals. Your marriage prospects really fall down because men don't like to marry lawyers. Now, at the time, I didn't believe her, but now I do. Having actually come into the profession and being in this profession for some time, you understand the amount of inherent biases that people have, especially when a woman becomes a practicing lawyer. Now, even when I started practicing law, I mean, so many people told me, why are you practicing law, especially criminal law? They said, I should probably work at an office. I mean, no offense to any of my good friends who are working at organizations, they're doing a fantastic job, but that should be out of an informed choice of that particular individual. It shouldn't be because just because it will be convenient for you as a woman if you have an 8 to 5 hour job, so that after your work is over you can attend to house chores. That shouldn't be the main goal and the objective. So many people question me, and it's very difficult. And even when you come to courts, you understand that because of the lack of a court policy in this country, we don't have a courts policy in this country that really regulates courts and the premises and the sort of access to justice that it entails. You see that, for an example, a woman who breastfeeds the child will not have a place to safely breastfeed a child, because we need to take the intersectionality into account. Because always, sometimes when a woman openly breastfeeds a child, some people tend to naturally look down upon her and then be like, okay, she really needs to know where she's doing this, unfortunately. But whereas what we need to understand is there are no existing provisions that exist for her to safely breastfeed the child. We don't have any daycare systems in our court systems where, if you're called to courts and if you have like a 2 or 3 year old child with you, where do you keep that child and go? Like, sure, if you have anybody to take care of the child, but what if you don't? Where do you keep them? And even in terms of clean water and sanitation, I mean, do they have access to clean water in the court premises? Do they have access to clean sanitation facilities, sanitary facilities in the court system? So these are real issues that I encountered after I took oaths, especially in terms of the inherent biases. It really startled me at first to understand this existing inherent biasness in people, especially towards when a woman practices law, because they just, for some reason, I don't know what it is. I think, of course, a lot of other factors are to be blamed for the existing gender stereotyping in our country. But because of those reasons, I mean, I was pretty startled when people sort of express their inherent biases towards women practicing law.
But as you said, I believe that women become too powerful, and that's why they are afraid. You know, they don't want women to represent. They don't want women to come out and just do their thing because they do know that women are too powerful.
Mika, I think more than being too powerful, I think most of the time, this is my subjective opinion, it is that most of the time, what people are afraid is women being well informed of their rights, women
Yes.
being well informed of what they can do, as to what their rights entail, and who can be held responsible and where. I feel that there is a certain biasness and inequality that exists even in terms of disseminating information among the masses. Because usually what is known by a man, for an example, I'm talking about a very hypothetical situation, what is usually known by a man, what is general knowledge to a man, might not be general knowledge to a woman, because of the social conditions that exist, right? Because see, you can see that. So even if you look at a basic, a social setting, you will understand that. Now let's say some people come over to your house. Of course, the social obligation of serving these people who have arrived at your house, usually and most of the time or naturally, it falls upon the woman to serve these people, while of course the men in the family, engage in a very good conversation and get to know what's going on. So always, almost all the time, women are always kept away from these usual casual social conversations, which also then deprive them of this, what we call as general knowledge, right? So for an, I mean, you can practically see that, especially when some sense of an incident happens, especially in relation to law. Like, men would know which police to go to, how to talk, which one to approach. But we as women, unless you've studied the subject, unless you have a friend or a colleague who knows about the law, sometimes I myself have seen how clueless they could become, because these are not the sort of conversations they sort of get themselves engaged in in any level, unfortunately. So I feel that there is some sense of biasness that exists in our society, even in terms of knowledge dissemination, precisely what Yehelia also tries to bridge. So even if anybody goes to the Yehelia Foundation page on Instagram, Facebook, or now we're active on Twitter also, so we always tend to disseminate through all of our work knowledge. We feel that that is the best thing we can give it to you, and then we try to give it to you in the best way we can, and we know, I mean, it might not be the, like, the perfect way to disseminate knowledge, of course, because we have certain barriers in terms of resources, but because we have the ardent view that it is knowledge that really necessarily empowers, especially a woman, especially a young girl, because when you know your rights, when you know where you have to go and do what, then you are empowered. Of course, you need to be financially empowered, and there are other aspects of empowerment also, but I feel that when knowledge is being given, I think you're on a better foot altogether.
Yes. Now, when we come, when we talk about women and them having knowledge, them acquiring knowledge, who's responsible for this? Now, both women and men, they, school together most of the time, and they are equally open to, knowledge. But in a way, it's not, most of the time women are, especially when it comes to ethnicities and nationalities, most women of different ethnicities, they are not, they don't have the facility to have this knowledge and information. Now, who's responsible? Now, the education system, there's clearly something wrong in the Sri Lankan education system. Now, who do you think is responsible for this? Now, and how can we change this? In your
Because
opinion, obviously.
speaking about the education system, I would say now, even in terms of understanding about your health, even in understanding about contraception, for an example, sometimes you are deprived of that knowledge even at like your school level, because the teacher who is supposed to teach you that particular health lesson skips the lesson, saying, okay, you really need not know about these things, you'll get to know about these things as you grow up. So which is very unfortunate. So where from a very younger age, your 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 opportunity to learn about your reproductive health rights, what are my options, what are my alternatives, teach me about my body parts, for an example, teach me about biology in some sense, so that you understand about a lot of things such as menstruation and so many other things that are entailed in this particular subject. And when the teacher just merely, when the teacher decides to skip this particular chapter, your ability, your opportunity, your universal opportunity to learn about this subject is also taken away with that little decision,
It
right?
actually
So
happens most of the time.
which happens
Yes.
almost all the time. Like, even if you speak to Like, I mean, even of youngsters of my age, or even couple of years older to me or younger to me, they will always, most of them will tell you, yes, my teacher never did the health subject, the particular health chapter, that was always skipped, and the teacher always said, no, you'll learn about it, in time to come. But which shouldn't be the case. So if from a younger age, if you're taught about these things, and if you could normalize these things, that is why, Mika, if you take for an example the issue of menstruation in this country. Now, of course, see, sanitary napkins are not considered as a necessity today. Now we see that for some necessary food items, they always tend to reduce the prices. You go to a shop and do a little personal analysis on the how as to how expensive most of these sanitary napkins are, and check as to how unaffordable sanitary napkins are. Now someone might say, okay, so who cares? I mean, I'm sure everybody can afford it. No, you can't. They're about 350 to 500 rupees. Think about, daily wage earners. Somebody who earns 500 rupees a day cannot afford to buy themselves a packet of sanitary pads and go home. They have other needs that needs to be met. So sanitary napkins ideally is like a luxury item in this country. And even so, unless and otherwise you go to a Food City or Kiehl's or a Glowmark or a Spa and buy your sanitary napkins off the shelf, if you go to a pharmacy, and then if you, most of the time when you go to a pharmacy and ask for a packet of sanitary napkins, or even from a grocery store around your where you're domesticated, I mean, if you go there and if you ask for a packet of sanitary napkins, they tend to put that in a brown paper bag and give you to date.
Oh
So
yes,
even in 2022, they tend to sometimes put this sanitary napkin packet inside a brown paper bag and give you. But why? But
exactly.
why? Exactly, because of the taboo that exists, because it's such a hush hush topic. So even if I have gotten periods, for me to even ask my friend for a sanitary napkin, and for me to, can I stand up from where I am and take that sanitary napkin in my hand and just walk to the bathroom in a social setting? No, I have to hide it in my handbag and, like, walk to the bathroom as if I'm carrying something extremely illegal, unfortunately. But that is the status of this country, that is the culture that has been, continuing in this country, because people don't openly talk about menstruation. And there are also religious views on top of that, that always deem menstruation as a taboo, as a very hush hush topic. And then when you are menstruating, then you're considered as, it's considered as bad blood. Sometimes you're even, you can't even enter some of the religious places. Sometimes you can't even, you can't even go to or like worship certain places when you're on your period, so to say. So these are, actual practical problems that we encounter on a daily basis, and without no solution even from the state to sort of address. I mean, there's no sustainable solution from the state to address this issue.
Honestly, yes. I mean, now, Shalena, we as women, I think we do go through this on a daily basis, and people do, when most of the time when men like listen to it, when men hear that, it's like very a surprising act for them. But we do go through that on a daily basis. Now, since we talked about women and women representation, coming back to that, now we clearly don't see any high number of women representation in the parliament. Now in this country, I think the women population is actually larger than the population than that of the men, but we
Yes.
do see little women representation in parliament. We don't even see 10 representatives when it comes to female representation. Now, what is like the legal procedure behind this? What's the law and order behind this? Female representation? How much female should be there? Uh, in general, in a parliament basis, and what's the whole law and order? What's the guideline behind this? If in case if someone is listening and if someone wants to become a politician, a girl who's listening to us, if she wants to become a politician in the future, and if she's like, I'm going to do some change, What's the procedure that she has to go through?
Well, I would tell her that certainly constitutional provisions exist in this country for in terms of right to equality, because right to equality is a recognized fundamental right in this country. But of course, what you need to remember is that in the constitution, right to equality is recognized under Article 12. But under Article 12(1) of the constitution, even though it recognizes right to equality, it recognizes only the concept of sex. It does not recognize the concept of gender.
Yes,
Now,
now, Shalia. Now, would you please, please, please? I'm so sorry to disturb you, but would you please excuse me? Because we have to take a commercial break. So stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back as we have lots of interesting things to talk about with Naushalya.
Through the eyes of the megaminds of our time. The diagnosis. A pro analysis. Every Saturday from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. on Relax Radio. Through the eyes of the megaminds of our time. The diagnosis. A pro analysis. Every Saturday from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. on Relax Radio.
Hello and welcome back to the diagnosis where we, try to find solutions for the current crisis and whatever is happening here in Sri Lanka. Now today we have Naushalya Rajapaksha with us, and we've actually talking about women and female representation in a parliament in general. Now Naushalya, coming back to it, I'm so sorry I had to interrupt you. Coming back to it, what let's continue.
So Mika, thank you once again for the question. And basically, your question was as to the sort of advice that I would give anybody who would be willing to, enter the parliament, and as to the sort of constitutional provisions that exist in terms of, right to equality. So, as I was saying, Mika, certainly there's a fundamental right that exists to ensure and protect the right to equality. But of course, if you look at this particular article in the Constitution under Article 12.1, you will observe the fact that this particular article, even though it speaks of right to equality, it doesn't speak of uh, gender. It only speaks of sex. So, for an example, this particular article goes on to say that you cannot be discriminated based on your sex, based on your religion, race, and ethnicity, or your political beliefs. Uh, but of course, this particular article does not expressly recognize the concept of gender. So I feel that even so, this is of course, as you know, Constitution is the apex document in the legal system of this country, and this is the only document that also recognizes the fundamental rights of individuals. So when this particular document itself expressly does not recognize the concept of gender, it is a huge problem, because as you know, I'm sure the listeners are aware of the fact that sex and gender are two different concepts altogether. So we cannot as a country then therefore say there is zero discrimination, especially especially in terms of gender equality, because gender is not a concept that is recognized in our constitution. Now, of course, what you need to understand is under Article 12, subsection 4, of course, there is provision. They have expressly, the Constitution has expressly made provision and enabled for you to create subordinate legislation for the advancement of women to achieve formal and substantive equality. Now, even in this context, of course, you need to understand that constitutional provisions exist in terms of right to equality, but of course, the concept of gender is not recognized. So much so, even if you look at, even if you come back to the education, even if you come back to the primary and the secondary education of this country, you know, we don't really teach children the distinction between gender and sex, and that I believe is the biggest reason as to why there's so much of gender discrimination in this country, as to why so many people with different gender identities are looked down upon, because of the lack of awareness and education that exists. I believe, you know, because especially in a country where the constitution has been amended 20 times. Now, our constitution has been amended 20 times, but not once did anybody think of inculcating the word gender into Article 12.1 of the constitution, unfortunately. So, because of that, so when the constitution of the country itself doesn't recognize gender, so sometimes the ones in the education sector might argue and say, then why would we recognize what gender is? So now that is the current context of this country. And I would also would like to inform the fact that in this country now we saw there was a cabinet reshuffle very recently, but to date they haven't still appointed a minister or a cabinet level or a state minister for women's affairs and for children's affairs. So basically, now as Mika very correctly said, in Sri Lanka 52% of the population comprises of women. So, in a country, if you don't have a cabinet ministry to represent and work towards the welfare of the majority of the country, then I feel that we have failed as a nation, because we not only have national commitments to meet, we also have international commitments to meet. Like SIDO, for an example, SIDO, as most of you know, is an international convention to which, you know, we have placed our signature and we have said, okay, yes, we will work towards furthering the objective of this convention to eliminate discrimination against women. You know, we will certainly work towards it. So in this context, when this country doesn't have a cabinet minister or at least a state minister appointed to look into the subject of women and children, at least collectively, I mean, I feel that sometimes we have failed as a nation. But of course, coming back to the parliament, once again, you will see that we have less than about 13% of women in the parliament. because of the simple reason that most of the women actually came to the national list and most of the people got elected. But even those who got elected, now even in this Devanna Tarani outcome document, we have highlighted, even when we have highlighted most of these issues, you will see the sort of we were fortunate enough to interview some of the female members of the parliament, and the biggest issue that they themselves highlighted was this issue of finances, how it was difficult for them to sort of acquire finances to run a campaign. So that was one of the biggest issues that they themselves had. So therefore, and also lack of media guidelines in this country was also one of the other barriers that you might face if you want to enter into the into Sri Lankan politics, because of the lack of media guidelines. Of course, because of the amount of, because you will see as you enter politics there would be a gamut of mudslinging, there'll be a lot of hate speech, there'll be a lot of character assassination, so to say, and which the candidates would face sometimes in open media, sometimes on social media, and sometimes there's nothing you could do about it also. Because unfortunately, when a woman comes into the business of policy making, she's always looked down upon. People always tend to drag her through the mud, always point fingers and say, okay, you're here because of your father, you're here because your husband demise, your husband had a untimely death, okay, you're here because of this. We always try and pin nepotism every time a woman comes into power. But when a man comes into power, now if you look at all the 225 members of the parliament, most of the male members of parliament is there because of their fathers. It's because of their particular the family upbringing. But nobody would sort of pin nepotism there. But every time we speak about the fact that how in 1960, how SWRD Bandaranayake was the first female head of government in the world, the first criticism that comes along her way is, oh, she's there because her husband had an untimely death. Not necessarily, because later, because at the end of the day, she was elected. She ran a campaign. People also had other options that they could have voted if they just didn't like a woman. So these are things that people need to take into account. Even when you speak of Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumar Mutunga, the biggest allegation she has is, okay, she's here because of her family background. No, not necessarily. She also ran for election. She also had a brother in the family. But the brother didn't take up politics. But of course, she did. And she did so well, in her time. Of course, they are not without their. I'm sure, people have their various analysis as to the sort of, the issues during that administration. But, those aside, what you need to understand is, being a woman coming into power, coming into the business of policy making in a country where women are always deemed to be homemakers, for a woman to be a policy maker, it is absolutely difficult because of these existing barriers. So for anybody who is watching this, for anybody who would like to enter parliament, I would say be mindful of specifically these barriers in terms of lack of campaign financing and lack of media guidelines, and the lack of transparency that would exist within your political party. Because like I said, Mika, at the very outset, no matter how much I work for my party, let's say I have a certain party I work for. So no matter how much I work for this party, no matter the sort of community leadership I have given for this party, when it comes to receiving nominations, sometimes I don't get nominations, and to date I might not even know why. This was also one of the biggest issues that we highlighted in our outcome document, Devanna Taranaya, was this: the lack of transparency in the political party itself, especially when it comes to the nomination process. Because I don't know why I haven't gotten my nomination. I don't know on what basis you gave me marks or you cut marks from me, because it's not a transparent process. We don't have a uniform sort of like a nomination process among all the political parties that could allocate marks for your education, for your experience, for the sense of community leadership that you have given to your community, and for the amount of work you've done in the party. So many women have spoken to us about it, the fact that how they were not even given nominations to run even after doing so much of work for their respective political parties. So these are by far, I would say, us will be some of your biggest barriers. And this, I would say, would be the current context in which you will be entering the parliament.
Yes, now I do agree with you because, even at home, the policy making and, the rules generally run by, our mothers. And I do believe that in policy making, when it comes as a nation, women representatives, that's a necessity. Now, since we talked about politics and, the female representation in politics, I have one question for you, and that is, would you ever consider becoming a politician?
Interesting question, Meek, actually. I would say if opportunity presents for me to actually, contribute towards the development of this country, especially the, work towards the welfare of women and children, I would certainly take that on. I would certainly take that on because I have, by far, ever since I don't know, from the time I remember, I have been very much engaged in training and empowering young girls and women and, also young people. So, in that sector, I feel that, I could contribute all my experience and all my understanding and education if opportunity does present.
And I really, really think that if opportunity is there, you should go and do it. Do your part, because you are a good lawyer, and you, as a woman, you are great. And I think that you should do it because I believe that there's a possibility for you to do your part. For the women in general, for the society in general, and also coming back to the whole women representation and your position as a lawyer. Now I know that since you said that you worked for like studied for like 8 years, 8 long years studying law in Sri Lanka. Now it was actually a tedious process, I believe. Now, what kind of if Sri Lankan government, if the system was changed, I believe that you had many barriers when studying law. Now, if the system was changed, I believe that it will be very convenient for you. It would have been convenient for you, and it would be convenient for everyone who's expecting to study law in Sri Lanka. Now, coming back to Sri Lanka and other countries, the law in other countries as well, how they study and all. Do you have any idea? Now, would you recommend someone to study law in Sri Lanka? Is the system good? Is the education about law in Sri Lanka good? What are your thoughts about that?
I have absolutely no complaints about the education of law in Sri Lanka. I think it's fantastic. I think we are fortunate to have some of the best lecturers and teachers to teach you the subject, and even some of the counsel that you see in courts. They're fantastic. The kind of legal arguments that they bring about, their analysis of the law is absolutely praiseworthy. But of course, as a woman, when you come to the practice, when you come to practice law, certainly it's not without inherent biases and barriers like I highlighted earlier. So I guess it's a, but it's a gamble. I mean, you'll have to really weigh your options here. And but I would have no comment or no issue whatsoever as to the education process. I think it's fantastic, especially law college, that to which they have an open competitive exam, and if you get through it, you can actually go through law college, and without doing a bachelor of laws, you could also become a lawyer in this country thanks to the free education system that exists. So you have so many avenues for you to become a lawyer, and no doubt, and we are fortunate to have some of the best lecturers to teach you about the law and so forth. But it's only when it comes to practice, I feel that if more guidance can be given to the students as they are studying law, as to, I mean, if they could be given a sense of an understanding as to, okay, this is how it works. When you practice law, this is what it entails, this is what you're getting yourself into. If that understanding can be given, because I'm sure abroad, of course, you're always, you're open to a lot of internship opportunities, from the very outset, from your first year of law to second year to third year, where you're basically pushed to the practical side of it for you to see for yourself, how it actually works. So, if we can also inculcate something like that, absorb a similar system into our country and see how best, what it entails, the sort of the difficulties, the issues that it has, and also the advantages as well as the disadvantages it has from the very outset, then I'm sure individuals, irrespective of their gender, could make a very good informed decision as to becoming a lawyer.
Now, since we talked about your whole professional, as a lawyer, have you, ever been able to not execute your full potential when it comes to your professional career in Sri
Um,
Lanka?
some Sometimes, Zumika, yes, because sometimes I mean, for the main reason that sometimes clients don't tend to sort of place their entire trust on a woman also. Once again, I believe it's due to the inherent biases that exist, because this is predominantly a male dominated profession. That is the truth.
Yes.
Nobody can say it's not. So people are used to having a male lawyer. They're used to seeing a male lawyer getting up in courts representing them. So no matter how good you are in your communication, no matter how good you are in sort of analyzing a case and coming up with a defense, but the fact that you are a woman, the fact that you're in sari and not in a suit, sometimes, derail you of that opportunity, because sometimes it comes from the client also. Sometimes, because I've seen it sometimes when I am being sent for certain cases, and sometimes I have seen my clients be like, "Oh, it's you who's coming for the case," and then I have seen how sometimes the expressions change, and I'm certain that sometimes it could be because I'm a woman also, because I haven't seen such a change in expressions when a male colleague of mine has appeared for them. So up until you appear and sort of show, okay, you're also as good as your male colleagues, they always have that pre-existing doubt, that inherent doubt as to whether you could really do it or not.
They tend to
So
underestimate women.
exactly, exactly. Once again, Mika, I don't blame them, but I think it's once again is because of lack of education. That it's because of these, like I said, because of these pre-existing norms and perceptions in our society, which are enabled every single day, even as we speak. Even if you watch news, I mean, even if you watch news, because that in Sri Lanka most of the people watch news, but as even when you watch TV or news or anything, you will see so many advertisements. Now even in these advertisements, you will see to date, who makes that cup of tea? A woman. Who goes and washes all the dirty clothes in the house? A woman. Who takes care of all the children? A woman. So therefore, the fact that a woman is a homemaker and not a leader, she's not a political leader, she's not a policy maker, she can't take such, she cannot take such, actions on herself, it's basically, it is being absorbed into our mind, maybe not deliberately, sometimes involuntarily, it's been absorbed into our mind through television, through media, through informal education, through religious views, through societal norms. So with all of these factors, I mean, collectively, I mean, when you take all of these factors collected, I mean, then you will understand that, client is not merely to be blamed, because what he or she knows is, what he or she knows is for a woman to play a very limited role in the society, because of what he or she has seen, or what he or she has been forced to see, for an example. So I believe even they are not to be blamed.
Yeah, but the limited role that we were talking about, women in general, even our mothers, they're at home, they make the rules at home. But what they don't realize, what the majority of the society don't realize, is that home is the space. It's a space that we all come from, and that's a place where it's a foundation of the society. To be honest, Now, if women can, make policies, they make rules and regulations, they and run it very well, why can't they trust us with the nation? Why can't they trust us with something bigger than that?
I think that's change that needs to really start from our education system itself, Megha. Like from our education system itself, if people, if knowledge can be disseminated among students as to what human rights are. Because see, Mika, I've sometimes heard people say, okay, respect her because she's somebody's daughter, because she's somebody's mother, because she's somebody's girlfriend. No, Mika. Girls or women shouldn't be respected because they're somebody. Respect us because we are also human. We are on
Exactly.
the same platform. Be it a man, be it a woman, anything, but you have to be respected because you are another human, right? Treat another person just the same way you would like to be treated, not because they are somebody. No, take that concept away from you. I have seen openly how people advocate for this notion. Okay, treat her because also you also have a mother, so don't treat other women indifferently. No, treat another woman as a human being, how you would in general teach, treat a human being. That is the most important lesson that needs to be inculcated in our education system from the beginning. We see how during, how when holiday season starts, how we see so many boys, throwing water at girls, how they are like hooting, throwing rotten eggs. This is like the culture and the practice. Now, I mean, of course, when I was a schoolgirl, I took part in this also, throwing back water, sometimes getting a rotten egg go to
We
from
kids
nowhere.
anyway.
Exactly. But then those days it was fun. But it's only now you realize, oh my God, that was that same behavior that has enabled those boys to now even take the decision to sexually assault somebody. Because what they did then was to do something without my consent. Throwing water at me deliberately is an act where you're doing something without my consent, unless I ask you to throw water at me. So that is the beginning of sexual harassment in workplace. That is the beginning of sexual assault, domestic violence that we speak of, not only for men but also for women, right? So even I would have thought about, even before I threw back what I would have realized, okay, what am I doing? I'm retaliating here, but why? I'm also going against somebody's consent. Okay, let me stop here, let me rethink about this. But of course, such knowledge wasn't imparted on us. Gender equality, human rights, they are subjects we came to learn. We sort of like stumbled upon these subjects because of our passion and interest. Otherwise, we would have never really even studied these things, right? Not
Exactly.
every lawyer is conversant in gender equality and human rights, unfortunately, also. Because these are topics that we stumbled upon much, much, much later after schooling and much later after doing our degrees. But all I'm trying to tell you is that it shouldn't be the case. These should be topics that we talk about from such younger ages, where we are sort of exposed to understanding, okay, these are human rights. I shouldn't touch somebody, I shouldn't throw water, I shouldn't even catcall somebody like this, because it basically violates somebody's right to private life, their freedom.
Exactly.
Be and let be. Sort of help create a society where people feel like they're free to walk, they're free to dress whatever they want to, they're free to do whatever they want to, as long as it doesn't really violate someone else's fundamental rights. But unfortunately it wasn't given to us, so these are all the things that we've learned subsequently. So my finally I would like to say, these are all human rights that we are talking about. Today this is a developing subject, gender equality is a developing subject. Today we still learn about new things, but it's a developing subject. But the crux of the matter is, these are all human rights, and to treat people equally, ask yourself how you would like to be treated in any situation, and treat them accordingly, irrespective of their caste and creed and ethnicity and religion and gender. Just treat people right, just the way you would like to be treated.
Wise words now, Shalina. Now, I really, really wish that we could, continue doing this, but unfortunately, time is actually getting on our way. So, I would like to make this a more, an opportunity to thank you. Thank you for, your precious time and for you sharing knowledge, sharing what you've acquired throughout the years with us. And I'm pretty sure that everyone, all the listeners, loved hearing it, and I'm pretty sure that they gained something out of this, because I myself honestly did learn a lot, and I hopefully in the future would love to have you back on our show again. With that being said, unfortunately, we've come to the end of the program, but then don't worry, we'll be,